Welcome to Latinas Leading from the Pipeline to the Boardroom. This session will begin soon.
Hello and welcome to Latinas Leading in the Boardroom. We are thrilled that you are here joining us today, and we are in for such a fantastic conversation that is going to be led by Ana Dutra. Ana is a Brazilian with 30 years of experience in global P&L management, M&A, technology, and business growth in 25 countries. And so we're in for a treat for this conversation on Latinas Leading from the Pipeline to the Boardroom. And Ana, I will turn it over to you to take it away.
Thank you, Brittany. First of all, it is such a pleasure being here with you and also being amongst friends. I mean, our three awesome panelists are people who I've known for years and years. And if there's one thing that they have in common is their commitment to the Latino community, to building diversity in corporation and boards. So with no further ado, let me introduce them and then talk a little bit about the topic. And I know that your faces are going to show up as I say your name. So Robert Baird is the CEO of Latina Style, one of the most respected publications in the Latino community since 2001. They produce magazines that you know, such as Latina Style Business Series, the Latina Style 50 Awards, and the Diversity Leaders Conferencing, reporting on the top 50 companies for Latinas to work for in the United States. The National Latina Symposium, recognizing Latina achievement, is also one of their initiatives in the Distinguished Military Service Awards, honoring outstanding Latinas for their military service. Robert is a graduate of the MALDEF Leadership Training Program and is actively involved in the endeavors of the Hispanic community. He is also a graduate of the California State University and completed graduate studies at UCLA, Harvard, Yale, and Columbia. Certainly a lifelong learner. Thank you for being with us, Robert. Now on to Ann Alonso. Ann Alonso is a dear friend as well, a former global C-suite executive and CEO who currently serves as a business advisor and board director. Ann has had executive roles in companies like Amoco, Kraft Foods, and Corteva AgriScience, as well as in large non-for-profit organizations such as the USDA, the American Egg Board, and the National Foreign Trade Council. Ann is an expert in gaining market access, developing strategy for private government partnerships across North America, Asia, EMEA, and Latin America. And she's often the senior-most woman of color in Latina at companies as well as in organizations that span multiple countries. She received a number of awards, and most recently, one of the most powerful Latinas yet again in the United States. And now, last but not least, my dear friend Sid Wilson, who was named President and CEO of the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility, HACER, in July of 2014. HACER works closely with corporations, CEOs, and board directors, as well as chief diversity officers. And their mission is to increase representation of Hispanics at all levels in corporate America. In addition to running HACER, Sid directs programs and initiatives aimed at encouraging Fortune 500 companies to increase Hispanic inclusion in areas of employment, procurement, philanthropy, and governance. He focused on elevating diverse talent to corporate boards, and it extends not only to Hispanics, but also women and all people of color through his service as the chair of the Alliance for Board Diversity, ABD. So as you can see, we have a wealth of experience, knowledge, and it's going to be a treat for all of us to listen from those three panelists. So why this topic, right? As you know, and as Brittany just mentioned, I'm on the board of Women Business Collaborative, as well as on the board of the Latino Corporate Directors Association, and I'm in the middle of one of their conferences right now. And And one of the 9 initiatives driven by WBC is on expanding the number of women on boards. Well, if you peel the onion, then within women on boards, we have Latinas on boards, which is still the lowest percentage, despite all the efforts that that we've been doing. It's still in not even in the low teens. For Latinos as a whole, but for Latinas, it's 2% of the public company directors are Latinas. And one of the things that we always talk about is, well, there is the putting the qualified female women executives out there, but there's also the pipeline. So we partner with organizations like HACER, like C200, NACD, WCD, to not only increase the number of women on boards, but also more specifically, increase the number of women of color and Latino on boards. So let me ask you a question for the 3 of you, and I want to hear your story about your very first experience leading a Latina-focused D&I initiative. What have you learned from that? All of you have been in the game for a long time. So Sid, let me start with you. What was your very, very first foray into this field?
Well, thanks, Anna, and thank you, by the way, for your leadership, not only on the LCDA board, but of course your longtime executive leadership, really being, that beacon for Latinas that are looking to rise up to become CEOs and board directors. And I also do just want to give a shout out and thanks to the Women's Business Collaborative and my good friend Edie Frazier, who's been a great leader. So thank you for this opportunity to participate. For me, my first engagement was as an infant. My mother was effectively the chief operating officer of my father's medical practice, and so I watched my mother go into these business gatherings, mostly the medical fields, and she was the one that was the effective executive leader. My father, of course, was the physician that was very focused on his medical practice, but the business portion of it, I watched that from my mother, and so that was how I grew up. Seeing a very strong executive mother maneuver in these medical spaces that were very male dominated. And so as I grew up and recognized that it was important not only to be an advocate for Latinas, but to be a strong ally for Latinas. So throughout my Wall Street career, and now, of course, as president and CEO for the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility, also known as HACER, Latina empowerment is key. We did a research report specifically on the challenges that are facing Latinas. And of course, one of our newest initiatives is our Latina Empower Summit. But on top of that is what we have to do to really address the fact that there is a lack of Latinas that are in the C-suite, that are in CEO roles and serving on corporate boards. So that's how it first started, but it started very, very young, and it's now just ingrained in my DNA.
Thank you. What about you, Anne? What was your very first experience leading a Latina-focused D&I initiative?
And hi, everybody. Also, thank you, WBC, Edie, and it's wonderful to be on this panel. So I have a different take on this. I've been in many organizations. I was in 4 federal government agencies, and I was in 3 companies over, 30 years, if you will. And I thought about this question. I've not really been part, nor have I led a Latina-only initiative. And I think that the focus on Latinas is tremendous, and kudos to Robert, who this has been the centerpiece of his work with the magazine, and also Sid with the conferences and the focus that you've been putting on this. I've led Latino initiatives, which have included men, if you will, at 2 corporations and in 1 federal government agency. And one of the questions you had asked before, Anna, is what do we learn from it? And I guess I learned a couple of things that I'd like to share. I think that, especially in large organizations of which I've been a part of, I think it's so critical that there be champions at the senior level. This just cannot work without the buy-in and the support of folks that are very senior And that's been one of my takeaways from being at 7 organizations, of which there was no Latina only focus. Another one is that there actually be a plan of action. I know I led a Latino mentoring initiative in the government, one of my agencies, and it was, very networky, very social, which is very important. But at the end of the day, we wanted to advance our Latinos at this organization. So we put a plan together, we put metrics, we put outcomes, and we wanted to show results. And the last thing, and I think this is critically important, is that we also, in one of the groups Latino groups that we formed, there was a mentoring cohort, if you will, with senior Latinos, the few that there were in this organization. And, and they got assigned to them some of the Latino, employees. I think what was very effective, and I think what is really needed, is that there's not just mentors, but there's sponsors. And that some of these folks, these senior folks, these Latinos as well, are able to speak well of you when you're not in the door, helping you to position you. And so a long response to your question, but I have not really been in Latina initiatives, and kudos to these gentlemen and to yourself and to WBC for focusing on Latinas.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And intention is critical, right? Intention and setting up the initiative. And now, Robert, your life was a sequence of initiatives to promote Latinas. What have you learned over the years? What lessons have you learned?
Well, for me, first of all, I would like to thank you, Anna, for your leadership and working with the panel and with the Women's Collaborative, and Edie Frazier, who is, of course, our friend and one of the true champions of women empowerment around the world. It's good to be here with Anna, with Anne, and with Sid, because the world that we live in, especially Sid and I think, even more than Anne, we live in a world of trying to empower our community to make sure that they get the opportunities that they really deserve. And empowering can take many, many different forms. For me, as you can imagine, I'm leading a Latina organization, a Latina empowerment organization. And being a man was a challenge in the beginning. My company began as a magazine, Latina Style magazine, led by my late wife, Ana Maria Arias. And unfortunately, sadly, Ana passed away in 2001, when we couldn't find somebody to really take over the reins of the company the way we wanted it. I basically took it on for an interim position, if you will, and now it's been 20 plus years later. So I've been living in a Latina world every day of my life for the last 20 years. I'm fortunate enough that my partner, Lupita Colmenero, who is the Chief Operating Officer of our company, is a tremendous leader as well. And I learn every day. I learn, how Latinas think, how Latinas really forge ahead. And if there is anything that really highlights that more than ever, is how Latinas have managed to survive through the COVID pandemic. Latinas are the fastest growing segment of the small business community. They continue to enroll in colleges and universities at accelerated rates, and they're climbing up the corporate ladder. And now, all of us, we are advocating on behalf of Latinas to make it into the corporate board.
Yeah. And we need more role models, right? So that's a great segue. And you have been a Latina trailblazer and role model in corporate America, from management roles and now into the boardroom. Tell us a little bit about your journey. And most important, what advice would you give to little Anne if you could talk to her right now?
Thank you. Well, yes, I've been in 3 Fortune 500 companies, but I started my career in public service. I was a regulator at EPA right out of law school. And then I became a diplomat at the US Embassy in Mexico. Then I became a political appointee at the Department of Commerce before I was recruited into corporate America. But when I got recruited into corporate America, I walked in the door and there was a merger announcement. So 3 months later, we all lose our roles and we're offered something else, but not quite. But you make lemonade out of lemons. And I took the opportunity to finish my MBA, and so went on to a trade association, and then I got recruited back into corporate America. And then after several years, another business change happened. So I left corporate America and I went back to public service, on and on and on. My point is that my journey, and for those women listening, it's been circuitous, like many of us, and zigzagging, but it's always been moving forward, learning from, and gaining experience. So in terms of advice to my younger self, I thought about this. I think there's two pieces of advice I would give the younger Anne. One of them is to not worry when things don't work out. You saw what happened with my, corporate, there's a changeover, there's a business change. I think that you get through it, you rebound, you reinvent yourself, and you move forward. And it always seems to work out, and maybe even for the better. So I think that that's one piece of advice I'd give the younger Anne, not worry so much. And the second thing, and maybe this is not what you expected to hear, but I think it really underscored during the pandemic, is to balance and prioritize your personal life. I think for many of us, especially maybe during a certain generation, we were just so unifocused on our career. And you really do, I believe, need to take care of your family, your health, and your well-being and your friends. I think it's really important. And so those are the two pieces of advice I'd give the younger Anne.
I love hearing that from you, because when I'm asked that question, the one thing I always say, if I knew that if I just took 20 minutes a day to do something for myself, to re-energize, replenish, I would have been better instead of just going and going and going. So that's like two more mature women giving you all advice is make time for yourself. And I agree with you. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. As cliche as it is true. Now, Sid, you've been a part and led Latina-focused D&I initiatives in different organizations over the last couple of decades. And actually, I'm just thinking about the fact that when I first met you, what is now LCDA was an initiative within HACER. And I don't think you were even CEO of HACER yet, right? So you've seen the evolution of those initiatives. What changed over the years? Do you have more awareness now? Do you have more corporations participating? What changed?
I think that what has changed, or at least what has changed in terms of how HACER really focuses on Latina initiatives, is one is we have over 116 corporate members and growing, and we're constantly talking to corporate America, not only our members, but of course the overall public, that that companies need to be intentional. We call it intentional inclusion in terms of how they think about elevating Latinas to the higher levels within corporate. Whenever I hear about the words, well, we're trying to find qualified candidates, my answer to the companies is that here's the issue with that, is that the current structure of corporate America is show me your resume and I'll show you a mid-level manager job. Show me your sponsorship and I will show you a C-suite position. Show me your network and I'll show you a board seat. And when you look at that current structure as it is in place, and then you see where corporate America is telling Latinas, well, work hard and hopefully it'll just get noticed on its own. And then if that happens, maybe you'll get an opportunity to move up. When the reality is that every single Fortune 500 C-suite executive is in their position because they are all 100% sponsored. I have never once had someone say, I'm looking for a chief financial officer. Can you please get some resumes together so that I can get a chief financial officer, a chief operating officer, a chief marketing officer? No, they're like, show me their sponsorships. And as you know, Anna, is that the big challenge is the fact that board seats are still chosen by word of mouth. Even for those small percentage, about 1/3 that are chosen by search firms, the search firms go by word of mouth, and so so how we make sure that that we are being intentional, that your searches must include Latinas. Your executive pipeline must include intentionality, not only for the intentionality for the C-suite, but for the intentionality for what I call the power positions. What's your pipeline into the general counsel's office? What's your pipeline going into the chief operating officer pipeline? What's your pipeline going into the chief financial officer? Because we know that those positions are the path to becoming a future chief executive officer. And with only 2 Latinas that are serving as CEOs of Fortune 500 company, I'm sorry, not Fortune 500, any publicly traded company. And even on the African-American side, there's only 2 African-American CEOs, Black women that are CEOs. You can see that there is a major pipeline issue. And so that's one of the things that we are being very intentional, that we have to make sure we remind them that it is about sponsorship and making sure that we create those intentional opportunities for Latinos to rise up.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Robert, now moving to the supply side, right? Robert, over the years, you have portrayed a number of extremely successful Latinas in your publications, right? And you look at them and you think, okay, what do they have in common? What is the secret sauce? So can you give the secret sauce to our audience here? What have you identified along the way that is more common amongst the women who are more successful?
Well, just like what Sid just mentioned, is who has been sponsored and who has been like an angel tapped on the shoulder and move along the different divisions of the company. The most important thing, and I think something that Sid does that has really made a difference, is you're not going to get to a board seat unprepared. Not matter how effective you are at your job, if you don't have all the qualifications to be on a board seat, you're not going to get there. And especially since now there are so many that are being pushed forward. We want Latinas that once they get to the board seat, they're ready to take that seat. They're not going to be learning. Of course, they're going to be learning like any new, board member, but they're probably going to get on a board that is mostly white men. And we just don't want Latinas to get to the board and sit there and listen to this wonderful stories that the men are going to tell without them having the chance to provide any insight whatsoever. So, one of the things that is, the most important thing is be prepared. For Latinas is just prepare yourself. And there are programs like the ones that Sid has that will train you and educate you on how to serve as a board member and what, how to behave as a board member. And since for Latinas, we have over 10,000 Latinas that we have profiled that are high in the corporate world, that we have done through our program, the Latina Style 50, which by the way, it's next week, it's the awards in Washington, DC, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you there. But when Latinas get to a certain position, the company has to be intentional in moving them forward. And for a long, long time, Latinas were only rising through the ranks, let's say in HR positions, or they would put them in public relations positions. And all of us that advocate on behalf of Latinas said, well, I want to see Latinas in your financial department, in your technology, in your public affairs. So through the years, Latinas have begun to, to form coalitions that help them get there. And the fact that now we have the Latino Corporate Officer Association is a big help, but you have to be prepared. And to get to the board, you don't get to the board for how many clicks you get on your postings on social media. That's not how you get to a board. The board is going to look to somebody to fill a specific position for which they have a need. And we are at a specific time that thanks to the work that a lot of the African American community has done, there's a tremendous push to get minorities and women into the boards.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I always say that just worse than not having representation on the board is having bad representation, right? So
Absolutely.
I want to hear that the people, the candidates who we are sponsoring, preparing, and leading into the boardroom are superstars when they get there. So let's hear from the superstar. And you just joined your first public company board, right? We talked here about sponsorships, network. What have you learned in your journey? Did you receive any particular valuable advice actually to get there?
Yeah, so Anna, I think that, my last role in corporate America was in the C-suite. So I was part of the leadership team, and I was already part of the conversation. I was learning about governance, on the job. I was presenting to the board. And I just want to underscore that because I think that is really critically important. And that is why we're pushing so hard in terms of advancing in the pipeline, because it's really tough in terms of your first board. And I think that that was very helpful to me. And that's what I learned, is that my last role was very helpful in terms of advancing to the board director level. I think, I thought about this. 3 pieces of advice I would give now that I've been on the board for a couple months and kind of in retrospect. I think it's important to manage expectations. This can take a long time. A lot of things have to align many times for a board role and for your placement. And so that's something I've learned, and something that I know, Anna, that you've learned and many of us have in this journey. I think the second thing is to really understand what you're bringing to the table. What is your value proposition? And, for me, sustainability, ESG, regulatory trade, those are areas that I believe I brought to the table. And your ability to communicate it effectively to the folks who are, doing the hiring, the non-gov or the board committee. And last, and I think this was spoken about, you do need to get the word out. You need to get the word out to your networks. You need to get the word out to recruiters. It's a challenge, but I think those are the 3 things that I come away with. And I think it's really critical that you come from corporate America, hopefully, trained and developed. And if not, there's a lot of programs out there that, we're starting to see that are very helpful for this endeavor.
Yeah, and you are very good at leveraging those programs. So what advice would you give to the people on this call on how to leverage organizations like HACER, LCDA, HACE, Women Empowerment Network? How can Latinas go to those organizations, and what kind of support should they ask for?
Is that for me, Anna, as well?
Yeah. And for you, and then I'll ask Sid the same question, because he's running one of those organizations, right?
So Anna, yeah, I would say you need to join them and you need to be active. And depending on where you are in your career journey, I think, some of the organizations may be more helpful, if you will. I think of a golf bag, and you think of the different clubs in that bag. You have drivers and you have woods and you have irons. For me, the club that I think is very helpful to me as I pursue board opportunities, strategic opportunities, is the Latino Corporate Directors Association. And Anna, we've all spoken about them. They're actually having their conference right now in New York City. And I think that they've been highly supportive. They have an institute that teaches you and works with you on governance and serving on a board, webinars, board leads. And I think there's a lot of emotional support. So I think that that's really tremendous. But for Latinas in the pipeline, ACE, when there's, Latina style, next week, I'm hoping a lot of folks, and I think they will go to the conference, I think are so helpful for convening and for training and developing. And I want to give a shout out to WBC, to the Women's Business Collaborative. I mean, this is proof positive that this is, high on their agenda. And I thank Edie Frazier and the organization. But join and be active, because I think these organizations are tremendously helpful.
And I would add one thing to what you said. It's join, be active, and then use that organization to pay it forward too, right? So we're doing this panel here, sponsored by WBC, but I came from moderating a panel for LCDA, and I'm going back to participating in another panel and mentoring exercise for LCDA. But one thing that people don't know, since Anne mentioned LCDA was actually born out of HACER, which it started there. So the more participation, the more engagement we have in those organizations, the more they multiply as well, right? So same question to you, Sid. What advice do you give to people who are listening to this call on how to engage with HACER and with other organizations that will help them on the pursuit of their goals?
Yeah, so certainly, as Anne mentioned, engaging and participating. Again, LCDA, which is an excellent organization, as you mentioned, yes, born out of HACER. HACER also has our executive programs that we do. We actually have our Latina Power Summit that happens every March. But I also want to give the attendees also some more advice. And actually, I love Anne's golf analogy, and I want to take a similar golf analogy, because when one of the initiatives that HACER is doing is that we actually did a session at our Latina Power Summit on executive networking through golf, because what we are now communicating to corporate America is that it's not just about how you're promoting and how you're sponsoring in the office, but how you're engaging with your with potential pipeline executive ready, board ready candidates outside the office. And one of the big challenges that we see is that Latinas are consistently not invited to corporate golf outings. And when they are not invited, the men often go to the outings, and then you have 5 hours to connect with a potential future executive. And by the time you're done, and anyone that's played golf knows that after 18 holes, you're like best friends with your partner that you played with, even after just playing with them for 5 hours. And that's on a personal level. Now you add that to what happens in corporate, and you can see how sponsorship happens. And so our criticism of corporate America is that your diversity and inclusion strategy for Latinas does not factor in where these sponsorship activities often happen, and they don't happen in the office. They tend to happen outside the office. And so that if you are sponsoring a golf initiative, if you're sponsoring a PGA event, if you are hosting a golf outing, you must factor in Latina inclusion in these gatherings, because we know that sponsorship takes place in those events. And then lastly is, while it's important to be at all of our Latino and Latina initiatives, it's also important to go to these non-diverse initiatives. I'm proud that for the 4th consecutive year, HACER is making our presence at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. It all started 4 years ago when I crashed it, went uninvited because of the fact that Latinos are being left out. But I'm actually proud that I'm going to be speaking in not 1, but 2 sessions in Davos focused on women of color, and particularly Latinas, making the case, the fact that Latinas by yourself is somewhere around the 11th or 12th largest economy in the world. So if you're thinking about your globalization strategy, you cannot succeed with your globalization strategy without thinking about your Latina empowerment strategy. So those are among the things that we recommend, but also what it is that we are continuing to do in these non-diverse segment gatherings.
That's very cool. That's very cool, Sid. Yeah, I'm actually going to you, but I was going to say only Sid would crash Davos, right? Robert, I wanted to make a comment, and I want you to also include in your comment, because something that we talked about. Anne and Sid talked a lot about sponsors and sponsorships, but you and I talked about the difference between sponsorships and mentorships, right? Having a sponsor champion versus having a mentor, and why Latinas need both. Can you, in addition to your comment, can you add on that as well?
Well, the mentoring in corporate America has been taking place for a long, long time. The sponsorship is something that is a different animal, because the sponsorship means that somebody at a higher level has taken an interest in you and they're willing to advocate on your behalf with their peers. We've had a number of Latinas that have been sponsored, all the way to the positions that they have, especially on the C-suite. And they've been sponsoring mostly by, let's be honest, by white men. They have made it possible for Latinas to really succeed, in corporate America. One of the things that I wanted to mention, following on Sid's comment on the Gulf, is that there are a number of places that you should be part of if you're a Latina executive trying to advance. The biggest concentration of power in our communities is on the boards or the events of places like the museums, the national museums, or that's where you find all the CEOs are part of the board, all the highest executives are there. And at the symphony, you need to volunteer in organizations like that to make sure that you're present there, because the last thing that we don't want is to self-segregate ourselves. You need to be a member not only of Hispanic organizations, you need to be a member of women organizations like the Women Business Collaborative. Yeah, and because there you'll meet, a cross-section of women from all across the board, and some men that that get to sneak in. But that is extremely important. The mentoring, we have, you have some men that have been incredibly successful at mentoring Latinas and women in general. For instance, Ralph de la Vega, that I think was supposed to be with us today. He was the vice chair of AT&T, and he also was the president of a number of the divisions of AT&T through the years. He had an incredible team that he put together of women. Even when he led a communications company in Latin America, all his staff was women. I mean, I'm talking about senior staff. This is not, people that didn't have responsible positions. So every Latina that is trying to advance, you need to diversify yourself. Make sure you participate in organizations that are not exclusive or just Latino only. Please support the Latino organizations. And what happens when a senior Latina joins one of the organizations, Hispanic organizations, chances are that they will be on the top tier of that organization. But when you join a mega organizations like the general market of women, you'll be among your peers, and you will be with people that are even higher than you are. It is very, very important that you diversify.
Yeah, and I want to use something that you just said, and you used Ralph de la Vega's example of getting to the top and then building a team that was primarily women. And I think that sometimes we Latinos are a little bit shy about getting to power positions and then using that power to bring more Latinos up, right? To lift others. So what lessons can Latinas learn from other diverse segments regarding how they organize, how they mobilize, how they shamelessly support members of their communities? What can we learn? Because it's almost as if we are wired a little bit differently. Sid, you smiled, so you go first on that one, because you actually belong to multiple segments, right?
I love that answer, and part of this is going to build a little bit of what Robert was also sharing, because one of the things that we also promote that Latinas consider is that to watch if you are in a corporate culture that rewards relocation. We know that there are companies that are consistent in that the path to moving up the corporate ladder may require that flexibility. Now, we make the case with corporate America that is also a very male-centric view of promotions. And so we make the case that you need to take a step back and ask yourselves, is your promotion strategy a very male or even white male centric case where they assume that the man can relocate, but a woman will not? And that relocation leads to those executive promotions for men and not for women. And so you have to ask yourself, do we need to rethink the whole relocation strategy as a way for promotions? But if you are able to relocate, to consider those relocations. But here's the kicker, as Robert was mentioning about how to get on museum boards and hospital boards. And I share this with anyone that is in negotiations to be relocated. Demand that the company sponsor them to get on a prominent museum or hospital board. And the reason why is because, number one, that money is not going to come from the P&L. It's going to come from the foundation. The P&L doesn't pay for you to get on, let's say, the Memphis Museum of Art or the New Orleans Museum of Art or the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. That comes from the foundation. But when you relocate, ask for that, because what that does is that it guarantees you a spot on a very prominent nonprofit board, and then paid for by your foundation board, by your corporate foundation. And then that gets you into that network that may eventually help you get noticed to be on a future board seat at little or no cost to you. But part of this is, but when you get on that board, you do what I call declare. I'm proud that I do serve on a corporate board myself. I serve on the Rupert Company's board of directors, and I've been serving on boards for many years. And one of the first things I do when I go to board, and I say, mi nombre es Silvison, soy dominicano de pura cepa, ya tú sabes. And then I was like, if you don't know what I just said, it's your job to take your Google Translate out to figure out what I said, not my job to translate to you to what you said. And that's what's called acculturation, not assimilation. So our stance is, it's corporate America's obligation to acculturate. It's our role to work with them on acculturation. It's not for us to assimilate. And so those are a lot of the things that we can do. But if we put that together, where corporate America is doing this, strong allyship, visibility, and opportunities to help support when we do relocate or get on any of these prominent major boards, hospital boards, museum boards, private college boards, major nonprofit boards, then you start addressing not only the sponsorship, but also the network.
And that's awesome. And one thing that I always say is that to look at your board career as you would look at any other career. You don't go from never having served on a board to going into a public company board. You start, as you said, serving in non-for-profit boards, in charitable boards, in foundation boards, small private company boards, large private company boards, and then you if you want, you will serve on a public company board. We actually have a question from the audience saying, where can you find more information on the program about how to prepare for involvement on boards? For corporate boards, I would say, Andrea, go into the Latino Corporate Directors Association.org, lcda.org, or hacer.org as well. And then look in your community. If you don't serve on a board yet, look around your community where you can get involved, because this is a give and take. We're winding down to our last couple of minutes, so I'll ask you, the three of you, the same question. One thing that's we're very focused at WBC is not just talk. It's actually to have a call for action, right? Where can we move the needle? What can we change? So I'll close this thanking all of you, but also, Anne, what would your call for action be to our WBC audience, sponsors, and partners for the session?
It's a very simple call to action. Keep Latinas top of mind. Be intentional. Don't forget about us. We bring lots of value to the table. We're strong work ethic, got smarts, experience, bicultural, bilingual. If you want to mentor one, you have a job or a board lead, please reach out. That is my call to action.
That sounds great. What is your call for action, Robert?
Well, I second what Anne just said. And the other thing that you need to be aware of is all of us, plus all the leaders of the other organizations, we talk to each other. So we're always referring people from one to another, somebody that we've seen that has got tremendous potential. My call for action is pretty much the work that we do, and that's what we do that 24/7. So for action, I would like to invite you to come to the Latina Style 50, conference next week in Washington, D.C. You can find it at latinastyle.com, and network, because, at that point in time, we're going to have 50 of the top Latinas in corporate America, and we need to network all of them with each other. Finally, you mentioned it in passing, make sure that you join a nonprofit board. Nonprofits play a tremendous role in our communities, and they're like the feeding ground to a lot of the corporations that you want to get on the board. And the thing that we didn't get to, and we had talked about, Ana, in the past, is what do we do with Latinas? So once they get to the board, then what? So they just don't sit there seeing the ball
pay
being
it
thrown around.
forward, bring
Yeah.
in more. That's
Yeah.
what you do. And by the way, to your point, Robert, my very first corporate board, the opportunity came up because of somebody who I was serving with on a non-for-profit board, who saw my work ethics, saw my demeanor, saw what I brought to the table. And when an opportunity opened up on a board he was serving on, he approached me and said, "What do you think?" But Sid, your parting words, what is your call for action?
So my call to action is a little bit, maybe a little bolder. One is that every board director, every public company has a public list of their board of directors. Cross-check them to see if you know any of them, and get to know those board directors. If you do serve on a non-for-profit board, look at non-for-profits who have non-profit board directors who also serve on a corporate board. Because if you do serve on a non-for-profit board and there's not a single board director that serves on a corporate board, your chances of getting nominated for a corporate board is slim to zero. So find one, and this is why museum boards, hospital boards are such great tools, because they have a tendency to have nonprofit board directors who are also board directors. And then lastly, this is my real strong call to action, and that is, whatever you do as you consider rising up the ladder, just remember this, that when you plan to achieve what you dare to exceed, then great results you will see. When you plan to achieve, you dare to exceed, then great results you will see, whether it's having more Latinos in the C-suite, Latinos as CEOs, more Latinos on corporate boards, and yes, Latinos in the highest levels of public office, and one day even president of the United States. So I believe that will happen, and I believe that males need to be strong allies on this. Consider me and Robert and many others as strong allies for Latinas. Latinas, ustedes tienen poder. And so we know that it's our role to say, how can we make sure that we get out of the way and make sure that we are giving those opportunities for Latinas to rise up.
And what a wonderful, wonderful, uplifting way to finish this session. I want to send a virtual round of applause to the three of you, Sid, Robert, and Anne. You are amazing. Love you, love you, love you. And send back to Brittany. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ana. And yes, this has been fantastic. I've been feverishly taking notes over here. And I think there are two words that sum up this conversation: intentional inclusion. And so this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for attending.